June 15th, 1944. 23:47 hours. 15,000 feet over Normandy, France. The radar scope glowed green in the darkness. Elliot Brennan watched the sweep circle for the 100th time that night, his eyes aching from the phosphorescent light. Chicago seemed like another lifetime now. The mathematics degree from Northwestern, the quiet library where he'd studied calculus, the girl he'd left behind who stopped writing 3 months ago. All of it felt distant and unreal. Then a blip appeared on the scope. 20 miles out, moving fast from the east. Another blip. Then 3 more. 5 contacts total, bearing 090 degrees altitude, 15,000 feet speed, 180 knots. Brennan's pulse jumped. His voice came through the intercom steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Contact. 5 aircraft. Bearing 090, range 20 miles, Angels 15. In the pilot's seat, Lieutenant Nathaniel Bridger felt his hands tighten on the control yoke. 26-year-old farm boy from Ohio who'd volunteered for this madness. 6 days since D-Day. 6 days since they'd rushed the Black Widows to France. 6 days of waiting for this moment. Behind Bridger, in the top turret, Staff Sergeant Wyatt Dalton from Alabama checked his 450 caliber machine guns for the 3rd time. 22 years old, married to Martha back in Mobile, father to a 4-month-old daughter named Emma he'd never seen. The photograph in his breast pocket showed a tiny face, eyes closed, wrapped in a hospital blanket. His hands shook slightly as he gripped the gun handles. The P-61, a Black Widow, sat in the dark sky like something prehistoric. Serial number 42-5559. 28,000 pounds of aircraft that looked wrong to anyone who understood aviation. Twin booms extending back from the engines like insect legs. A central nacelle housing the crew. Tricycle landing gear that seemed backwards after generations of tail draggers. And that radar dome on the nose, bulbous and awkward, making the whole aircraft look pregnant. The ground crews called it the Beast. The bomber pilots called it unnecessary. The fighter jocks called it a joke. The German pilots who'd seen it didn't call it anything. They were dead. Bridger armed the 4 ANM-2 20mm cannons mounted in the belly. 200 rounds per cannon, 800 rounds total. Each shell the size of a man's thumb, designed to punch through bomber aluminum like tissue paper. Armor-piercing rounds to penetrate the aircraft structure. Incendiary rounds to ignite fuel tanks. High-explosive rounds to detonate inside the target. Together they could put 200 pounds of steel and explosives on target in a 3-second burst. One good burst could cut an aircraft in half. The twin Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines rumbled steadily, 18 cylinders, each 2,000 horsepower per side, 4,000 total horsepower driving the Black Widow through the night sky. The whole airframe vibrated with barely contained power. Everything about the P-61 was excessive. Excessive weight, excessive firepower, excessive complexity, but excessive was exactly what they needed. Bridger pushed the throttles forward. The Black Widow accelerated smoothly, climbing slightly as the huge wings bit into the thin air. 300 miles per hour, 320, 340. In the darkness, they were invisible. No navigation lights, no formation lights, no exhaust flames thanks to the flame dampers installed on both engines. Just 28,000 pounds of death moving through the European night. Range 18 miles, 17, 16. Brennan called out the countdown, his voice calm, mathematical. He'd trained for 18 months on the SCR-720 radar set, learning to read returns, filter false echoes, track multiple targets simultaneously. The radar could see 5 miles in clear conditions, less in rain or heavy clouds. But tonight the sky was clear and the German bombers showed up on his scope like they were lit by searchlights. 15 miles. 14. 13. The Germans were Junkers Ju-88 bombers. Fast, twin-engine aircraft capable of 300 miles per hour, armed with multiple machine guns. Veteran crews who'd been hitting the invasion beaches every night since June 6th. They were coming to bomb the supply ships again, to disrupt the Allied buildup, to kill American soldiers before they could get off the beaches. 12 miles, 11, 10. Bridger turned slightly, positioning the Black Widow for an approach from below and behind. The bomber's blind spot. The German night fighters had taught this lesson over Britain in 1940 and 1941. Come from where the rear gunners can't see you. Get close, kill quickly, disappear before anyone knows you're there. 9 miles, 8, 7. At 6 miles, Bridger could see them. 5 dark shapes against the slightly lighter sky, flying in loose formation, probably from Kampfgeschwader 6, based in Belgium. Good crews, experienced. They'd survived years of combat over Britain, Russia, the Mediterranean. They knew their business. They had no idea death was approaching from below. Bridger throttled back slightly, matching their speed. The gyroscopic gun sight on his instrument panel glowed softly, a revolutionary piece of technology combining radar ranging with ballistic computation. It calculated lead, automatically compensating for target speed, aircraft speed, ammunition, ballistic trajectory, even gravity drop. All Bridger had to do was put the illuminated reticle on the target and squeeze the trigger. 5 miles, 4, 3. At 2 miles, Bridger could see the blue exhaust flames from the Junkers Jumo engines, 12 cylinders per engine, liquid-cooled, designed for reliability over performance. The bombers droned on unaware. No defensive maneuvers, no gunners searching the darkness below them. They thought they owned the night. They were wrong. Range 1 mile. Brennan's voice remained steady. Target locked! Range 0.9 miles! Closure rate 200 knots! At 800 yards, Bridger centered the illuminated reticle on the lead bomber. He could see individual panel lines on the fuselage now. The black German crosses on the wings. The glazed nose where the bombardier sat, probably looking down at the dark French countryside, planning his bomb run. 600 yards, 500, 400. Bridger's finger curled around the trigger. His breathing slowed. The world narrowed to the gun sight, the target, the moment. At 400 yards, he fired. The night exploded. 4 streams of 20mm shells converged on the Junkers. 750 rounds per minute per cannon. 3,000 rounds per minute total. 50 shells per second hammering toward the bomber at 2,800 feet per second. The tracer rounds looked like glowing baseballs floating through space, lazy and gentle. But they were moving faster than most rifle bullets, and each one carried enough explosive power to blow a man's torso apart. The first shells hit the left engine. The Jumo 1211 engine simply disappeared in a spray of aluminum fragments and burning fuel. Pistons, crankshaft, cylinder heads, all transformed into shrapnel in a fraction of a second. The next shells walked across the fuselage. Each impact was a white flash, brief and brilliant. Armor-piercing shells punching through the thin aluminum skin. High-explosive shells detonating inside the crew compartment. Incendiary shells igniting everything flammable. The bomber's center section disintegrated. 2 seconds. 80 rounds fired. A 30,000-pound aircraft transformed into burning fragments falling toward Normandy. The formation scattered immediately. Bombers dove, climbed, turned desperately. Their radio channels exploded with warnings in German. Nachtjäger. Nachtjäger. Night fighter. But which direction? Where was it? They couldn't see the Black Widow. Just darkness, and then their wingman exploding, and then more darkness. Bridger rolled left, following a bomber that broke toward the coast. This pilot was good. He threw his Ju-88 into a diving turn, trying to shake pursuit. The bomber could do 350 miles per hour in a dive fast for such a large aircraft. The P-61 followed easily. Those huge wings that everyone mocked gave the Black Widow a turn radius that shocked pilots used to conventional fighters. The spoilerons, a combination of spoilers and ailerons that Jack Northrop had designed specifically for this aircraft, provided roll rates that seemed impossible for something so heavy. The German tail gunner opened fire. 13mm machine guns spitting tracers that floated past the P-61's canopy like angry fireflies. Wyatt Dalton wanted to return fire, but Bridger's voice came through the intercom. "Hold fire! Save your ammunition!" They closed to 300 yards. The German pilot was skilled, throwing his bomber through maneuvers that would have shaken off most pursuers. Barrel rolls, split S turns, desperate climbs that bled off speed and energy. Nothing worked. Bridger waited, patient, calm. The farm boy who'd spent summers hunting deer in Ohio forests knew how to track prey. Wait for the moment. Don't rush. Let the target make a mistake. The Ju-88 leveled out, trying to build speed in a straight run. The pilot probably thought he'd lost his pursuer in the darkness. Bridger fired a 1-second burst. 20 shells slammed into the bomber's right wing. The fuel tank exploded, a brilliant orange fireball that lit up the sky for miles. The wing tore off at the root and the Junkers cartwheeled into the darkness, burning. 2 down in 90 seconds. The remaining bombers were running for their lives now, diving for the deck, trying to get low enough that the radar would lose them in ground clutter. But Elliot Brennan was an artist with the SCR-720 radar set. 18 months of training hadn't been wasted. He filtered out the false returns, tracked through the clutter, maintained lock on the fleeing targets. Third target, bearing 170, range 3 miles, descending through 8,000 feet. Bridger pursued. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour as they dove after the bomber. The P-61 was red-lined at 430, but Bridger had heard test pilots had taken it past 450 in emergency dives. The controls grew heavy, requiring both hands on the yoke. Below them, the junker's pilot was trying everything, jinking left and right, skidding, even firing flares to blind the pursuing fighter. The radar didn't care about flares. Bridger closed to 250 yards and fired. This time the shells found the cockpit. The entire front of the bomber exploded in a shower of glass and aluminum. The pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, all gone in an instant. The junkers nosed over and went straight in, impacting in a French wheat field with a flash that lit up the countryside for miles. 3 bombers destroyed in 3 minutes. The other 2 had vanished, either running for home at full throttle or diving so low that even Brennan couldn't find them on the scope. Bridger climbed back to patrol altitude, checking fuel gauges. 180 gallons burned in the combat. Still had enough to patrol for 2 more hours. The twin R2800 engines ran smooth. All temperatures normal. Oil pressure steady. The P-61 had performed flawlessly. But this was just the beginning. Bridger's hands were shaking now, adrenaline draining away, replaced by a strange emptiness. He'd just killed at least 15 men. Probably more. Bomber crews were usually 5 or 6 per aircraft, times 3 aircraft. 15 to 18 men who'd woken up this morning in Belgium, eaten breakfast, climbed into their bombers, and now would never go home. He felt nothing about it. That scared him more than the combat. Wyatt Dalton's voice came through the intercom, excited, almost boyish. "Did you see that, sir? 3 kills, 3. They didn't even know what hit them." Bridger didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about the bombardier in that first Junkers, the one he'd seen through the glazed nose right before firing. Young face, maybe 20 years old. Looking down at France, probably thinking about the bomb run, about getting home for breakfast, and then 80 rounds of 20mm shells turning him into meat. "Yeah," Bridger finally said. "I saw it." They flew back to base in silence. The story of how they got here started 4 years earlier in 1940, when the world was learning what night bombing really meant. London burned. Rotterdam burned. Warsaw burned. German bombers owned the darkness, appearing without warning, dropping their bombs, disappearing before fighters could intercept. The British developed primitive night fighters, putting radar sets in Bristol Beaufighters and de Havilland Mosquitoes. The results were mixed. The radar was temperamental. The tactics were improvised. But it worked well enough to prove the concept. The United States Army Air Forces watched and decided to skip the learning curve entirely. Instead of adapting day fighters for night work, they would build the ultimate night fighter from scratch. Purpose-designed, purpose-built, no compromises. Northrop Aircraft got the contract in January 1941. Jack Northrop was known for radical designs. The P-61 was radical even for him. While everyone else was building single-engine fighters or trying to mount radar on existing aircraft, Northrop started with a clean sheet of paper and asked a simple question. What does a night fighter actually need first radar? Not an afterthought bolted onto an existing airframe, but integral to the design. The SCR-720 radar set would be housed in the nose with the antenna behind a streamlined dome, range 5 miles, coverage 360 degrees. The radar operator would sit behind the pilot, surrounded by his scopes and controls, able to track targets while the pilot maneuvered. Second firepower. Overwhelming, devastating firepower. 4 20mm cannons firing 750 rounds per minute each. 800 rounds of ammunition total. 16 seconds of continuous fire. Enough to destroy any bomber in existence with a single burst. Third endurance. Night fighters needed to patrol for hours, not minutes. The P-61 would carry enough fuel for 6 hours of flight time. It would loiter in the darkness, waiting, hunting, killing. Fourth performance. It had to be fast enough to catch bombers, maneuverable enough to dogfight if necessary, stable enough to be a good gun platform, reliable enough to operate from rough forward airfields. The design that emerged looked like nothing else flying. Twin Pratt and Whitney R2800 engines mounted on long booms extending back from the wing. A central nacelle for the crew. Tricycle landing gear for better visibility during ground operations. A remote-controlled gun turret on top carrying 450 caliber machine guns, and that radar dome on the nose. The first prototype flew on May 26, 1942. Test pilot Vance Breese took it up from Northrop's facility in Hawthorne, California, and immediately discovered problems. The tail buffeted so badly he thought it would tear off. The elevator fabric actually rippled in the airflow, flexing and bowing. When Breese attempted a loop to test high-G maneuvers, the elevator fabric ripped away completely. He barely recovered, fighting the controls all the way down to an emergency landing. Back to the drawing board. They reinforced the tail structure, added spoilers to control airflow, changed the tail design entirely twice, strengthened the elevators and replaced fabric with aluminum, added stall strips to the wing leading edges, modified the engine nacelles. by the time the P-61 was ready for production. It was 1943 and the urgency had decreased. The tide of war was turning. The Luftwaffe was weakening. Maybe they didn't need a specialized night fighter after all. Then came the invasion of Italy. September 1943. American and British forces landed at Salerno. The Germans counterattacked viciously, and every night Luftwaffe bombers hit the beaches. Junkers Ju-88s. Dornier DO217S, Heinkel HE111S. They bombed the supply dumps. They bombed the ships offshore. They killed soldiers who'd survived the landing only to die in their foxholes. The Navy lost destroyers to bombing. The Army lost precious supplies. And the Allied air forces had no effective way to stop it because they had no night fighters that could find the bombers in the darkness. The P-61 Black Widow suddenly became the most important aircraft in development. Production ramped up. Crews trained frantically. And by June 1944, the first operational P-61s were ready. Nathaniel Bridger had been flying P-38 Lightnings when the call came for volunteers. Twin-engine fighter pilots only. The P-61 was too complex for single-engine pilots to transition too quickly. You needed experience managing two engines coordinating throttles, understanding asymmetric thrust. Bridger volunteered immediately. Not because he was brave. Not because he was patriotic, though he was both those things. He volunteered because he was bored. The P-38 was a fine aircraft, but it was a day fighter. You took off at dawn, flew patrol, shot at Germans if you saw any, landed at dusk. Routine. Predictable. Night fighting sounded different, dangerous, challenging. He had no idea what he was getting into. The training took place at Hammerfield in California. 6 weeks of intensive instruction, learning the P-61 systems. The engines, the hydraulics, the electrical systems, the radar, the armament. Understanding the aircraft's quirks and limitations. Practicing approaches, gunnery, emergency procedures. And learning to trust your radar operator completely. That's where Bridger met Elliot Brennan. 24-years-old mathematics degree from Northwestern, 18 months of specialized radar training. Brennan could look at a radar scope and calculate intercept geometry in his head, adjusting for target speed, wind, drift, altitude differences. He'd scored in the top 2% of all radar operators in training, but he'd never been in combat. Neither had Bridger, if he was honest with himself. He'd flown patrols over England and France, but he'd never actually shot at anyone, never had anyone shoot at him. The war had been theoretical until now. Their third crew member was Wyatt Dalton. Alabama farm boy, dirt poor, joined the Army Air Forces to escape poverty and prove he was worth something. Gunnery school, top of his class, calm under pressure, good eyes, fast reflexes. He'd married his high school sweetheart Martha right before shipping out, and she'd gotten pregnant immediately. Their daughter Emma was born while Dalton was in training. He'd never seen her except in photographs. He carried her picture everywhere. The three of them flew their first training mission together on a cold February morning in 1944. Bridger in the pilot seat, Brennan at the radar, Dalton in the top turret. The brief was simple: intercept simulated targets, practice radar approaches, don't crash. Bridger was skeptical. The P-61 looked wrong, ungainly. The tricycle landing gear felt backwards. The long booms made it seem fragile. The weight, 28,000 pounds empty, seemed excessive for a fighter. But when he pushed the throttles forward and felt 4,000 horsepower wake up, his skepticism began to fade. The Black Widow accelerated like something half its size. The huge wings, 66 feet of span, generated massive lift. They climbed to 10,000 feet in 4 minutes faster than most day fighters. The controls were heavy but responsive. The spoilerons gave roll rates that seemed impossible. And when Brennan locked onto a simulated target and guided Bridger into position, when everything came together and the guns fired and the target drone exploded, Bridger understood. This wasn't a fighter trying to be a night interceptor. This was a night interceptor that could fight if it had to. The difference mattered. Over the next 4 months, they flew 100 training missions, learning to work together. Brennan calling out ranges and bearings, Bridger maneuvering into position. Dalton watching for threats. They developed a rhythm and understanding that went beyond words. But the other pilots remained skeptical. The bomber crews called the P-61 unnecessary. They had their own defensive armament. They flew in formations for mutual protection. They didn't need fighter escort at night. The day fighter pilots were worse. They looked at the Black Widow's weight, its size, its complexity, and laughed. Too heavy to turn, too slow to catch anything modern, too complicated to maintain in forward conditions. One P-51 Mustang pilot, a captain named Reynolds who'd scored 6 kills over Germany, was particularly vocal. "That thing's a freight train with wings," he said loud enough for everyone in the briefing room to hear. "First time it tries to maneuver, it'll snap its own wings off." Bridger said nothing. but he remembered. 3 days later, they staged a mock combat exercise. 4 P-51 Mustangs against 1 P-61 Black Widow. The Mustangs would try to intercept and shoot down the night fighter. Standard fighter tactics. Use their speed and maneuverability to dominate. Captain Reynolds led the Mustangs. The exercise began at 15,000 feet, the Black Widow orbiting lazily, while the Mustangs climbed to altitude. Reynolds split his formation, 2 aircraft high, 2 low classic pincer attack. Brennan picked them up on radar at 12 miles. 4 contacts, 2 high at Angels 18. 2 low at Angels 12, range 11 miles and closing. Bridger turned toward the threat accelerating. The P-61's top speed was 366 miles per hour slower than the P-51's 440. But in the vertical plane, those huge wings made all the difference. The first 2 Mustangs dove to attack. Bridger pulled up to meet them, trading speed for altitude. The P-61 climbed like it weighed nothing, the 4,000 horsepower and massive wing area defying physics. The Mustangs flashed past below, missing their shot. Bridger rolled inverted and pulled through, following them down. The spoiler-ons snapped the Black Widow into a roll faster than the Mustang pilots expected. Bridger got tone on Reynolds' wingman-simulated kill with the gun camera. 1 down. The other 2 Mustangs tried to bracket him, 1 on each side. Classic scissors maneuver. The P-61 should have been trapped too slow to disengage, too heavy to outturn them. Bridger chopped power on one engine and firewall the other. Asymmetric thrust. The Black Widow snap-rolled, reversing direction instantly. Got tone on the second Mustang. 2 down. Reynolds and his remaining wingman tried different tactics. Speed. They dove away, building velocity planning to come back with energy advantage. But Brennan was tracking them on radar. He called out their position continuously. Bridger knew exactly where they were, even when he couldn't see them. When they came back, Bridger was waiting. Head-on pass. Closure rate 800 miles per hour. In a real fight, the P-61's 4 20mm cannons would have shredded both Mustangs before they got close enough to fire their 50s. Exercise over. 4 simulated kills for the Black Widow. 0 for the Mustangs. In the debriefing room afterward, Captain Reynolds was silent. The smirk was gone. He looked at Bridger with something like respect mixed with confusion. "How did you do that? That thing weighs twice what a Mustang does. It shouldn't be able to maneuver like that." Bridger smiled. "It can't dogfight. But it doesn't have to. The radar tells me where you are. The cannons kill you before you know I'm there. And if you do find me, those big wings and all that power mean I can go vertical and you can't follow." Reynolds nodded slowly. "I underestimated it. We all did." "Yeah," Bridger said. "The Germans are going to do the same thing. That's when we kill them." They shipped out to England in May 1944, part of the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron. 18 P-61s, 54 crew members, ground support personnel. They arrived at a base in southern England just as the invasion preparations reached fever pitch. The mechanic assigned to Bridger's aircraft was Sergeant Silas Kowalczyk, 28 years old, Polish-American from Detroit. He'd worked in an automotive plant before the war building engines for Packard. He understood machinery the way some men understood music. Intuitive, natural. Kowalczyk looked at the P-61 and fell in love. "She's complicated," he said, running his hands over the engine cowling. "Temperamental, but she's got good bones. I'll keep her flying, Lieutenant. You just bring her home." Bridger appreciated that. A good crew chief could make the difference between life and death. The P-61 had 2,000 moving parts hydraulics for everything turbo superchargers that needed constant adjustment electrical systems that could short out in bad weather. Without skilled maintenance, it would never leave the ground. They flew their first operational mission on June 9th, 3 days after D-Day. Patrol over the English Channel, watching for German bombers trying to hit the invasion fleet. 8 hours of flying, circling in the darkness. Brennan staring at his radar scope until his eyes burned. No contact. Clear skies. They landed as dawn broke, exhausted and disappointed. "When do we get to shoot at someone?" Dalton asked. "Soon," Bridger said. "The Germans are regrouping. They'll come." He was right. On June 12th, they moved to France to a hastily prepared airstrip just inland from Omaha Beach. Dirt runway tents for quarters, fuel drums stacked everywhere. The sound of artillery was constant rumbling like distant thunder. The Germans bombed them the first night. Ju-88s came in low and fast, dropping bombs on the airstrip, trying to destroy the P-61s on the ground. Bridger and his crew scrambled, running for their aircraft, while explosions walked across the field. They got airborne, with bombs falling around them, Kowalczyk screaming at them from the ground to bring his airplane back in one piece. But they had no radar contact. The German bombers were already gone, running for home at maximum speed. "Next time," Brennan said, "next time we'll get them." June 15th, their 7th operational mission. 23:47 hours, 5 Junkers Ju-88s on Brennan's radar scope, and this time there was no next time. This time was now. 3 bombers destroyed in 3 minutes. They landed at 01:15 hours, 2.5 hours after takeoff. Kowalczyk was waiting, standing next to the P-61, smoking a cigarette. When the engines shut down and the propellers stopped spinning, he climbed up on the wing and looked at the gun ports. 680 rounds remaining out of 800. 120 rounds fired. 3 kills. 40 rounds per kill. Kowalczyk whistled softly. The Germans are going to learn to be afraid of this thing. Bridger climbed out of the cockpit legs, shaky hands still trembling. Wyatt Dalton was grinning excited, talking rapidly about the explosions, the tracers, the way the bombers just came apart. Elliot Brennan was quiet. He'd been doing the mathematics in his head. 40 rounds per kill. Each round weighed about half a pound. 20 pounds of metal and explosives per aircraft destroyed, times 3 aircraft. 60 pounds of ammunition to kill 15 to 18 men. The efficiency was remarkable. The implication was horrifying. Bridger walked away from the aircraft and vomited behind a fuel drum. Nobody saw him, or if they did, they pretended not to. Combat affected everyone differently. When he came back, Kowalczyk handed him a canteen of water. "First time's always hardest," the mechanic said. "How many times have you killed someone?" Bridger asked. "Never. I just fix the machines. You're the one who pulls the trigger." Bridger nodded. That was true. He'd pulled the trigger. He'd killed those men, not the aircraft, not the cannons. Him. He'd have to live with that. The intelligence report came through at 0300 hours. German radio intercepts confirmed 5 Ju-88s from Kampfgeschwader 6 had failed to return from their mission. Belgian resistance reported seeing 3 aircraft shot down over France, burning as they fell. 3 confirmed kills for Lieutenant Nathaniel Bridger and crew. The war had begun in earnest, and the Black Widow had announced its presence. Word spread through the Luftwaffe quickly. A new American night fighter, heavy cannons, radar that could see in complete darkness. Kills in a single burst. Invisible, until the tracers started flying. The German bomber crews began to fear the night sky over France. But they didn't know the worst part yet. The worst part was that the P-61 could do more than just kill bombers. It could fight. And the German aces were about to learn that lesson the hard way. July brought heat and blood to Normandy. The Allied breakout from the beaches had begun, but progress came slowly measured in yards purchased with lives. Every night, German bombers tried to disrupt the advance. Every night, the P-61 Black Widows hunted them. Nathaniel Bridger flew his second mission on July 3rd. Single Dornier, WW2 caught 40 miles inland heading for the supply dumps at Carentan. The bomber never saw them coming. Elliot Brennan locked the target at 6 miles. Bridger closed to 400 yards. 1 burst, 50 rounds. The Dornier's right wing folded upward and the aircraft tumbled into a forest, exploding on impact. Kill number 4, July 8th. 2 Heinkel He, 111s over the beaches, both destroyed within 2 minutes of each other. Bridger got 1. Another P-61 from the squadron got the second. They landed back at base just after midnight, and the ground crews painted small German crosses on the nose of aircraft 42-5559. 6 kills now. 1 more, and Bridger would be an ace. But the number meant nothing to him. Each cross represented men who'd burned alive or died on impact, or bled out in the wreckage. Young men, probably. Teenagers and 20-year-olds with families back in Germany who would get telegrams saying their sons weren't coming home. Bridger tried not to think about it. The missions blurred together. July 12th, 1, Ju-88. July 19th, 2, Do-217S. July 23rd. Another Ju-88 that tried to run and almost made it to Belgium before Brennan's radar found it in the darkness. July 27th. A Heinkel flying so low it was nearly scraping the treetops trying to avoid radar detection. Didn't work. Brennan picked it up at 3 miles and Bridger shot it down over a farmer's field near Caen. 15 missions in 6 weeks, 10 confirmed kills. The other P-61 crews were having similar success. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron was establishing a reputation. The beast that everyone had mocked was proving its worth in German blood. But something else was developing too. The crew was becoming a unit. A brotherhood. It happened gradually, the way all important things happen, small moments accumulating into something larger. Wyatt Dalton showing Bridger another photograph of baby Emma, now 5 months old, smiling at the camera. Elliot Brennan, calculating that they'd flown 127 combat hours together, which meant they'd survived 7,620 minutes when any single minute could have killed them all. Sergeant Kowalczyk, working through the night to repair flak damage, fabricating parts from scrap metal when proper replacements weren't available. They started eating meals together, playing cards in the tent they shared, writing letters home while sitting around the same kerosene lamp. Small rituals that meant everything. Dalton talked about Alabama, the farm where he'd grown up, his father who'd died when Wyatt was 12, leaving him to help his mother run the place. How they'd lost it anyway during the Depression. How he'd promised himself he'd never be poor again, never let his children go hungry the way he had. "When I get home," Dalton said one night, shuffling cards, "Emma's going to be walking, maybe talking. I'm going to teach her to read. Going to make sure she goes to school. She's going to have opportunities I never had." "She'll be proud of you," Bridger said. "I hope so. I hope when she's older and asks what I did in the war, I can tell her something that makes sense, not just that I killed people." Brennan looked up from the letter he was writing. "You protected people. That's what you tell her. We're stopping bombers from killing Allied soldiers. Every bomber we shoot down is lives saved on our side. You think it balances out? I don't know, but it has to mean something." The mathematics of death. 15 German aircrew killed versus perhaps 50 Allied soldiers saved per bomber destroyed. The equation looked favorable on paper, but equations didn't capture the reality of burning aircraft and men screaming as they died. Bridger wrote letters home to Ohio to his mother and father and younger sister. He couldn't tell them about the missions, about the killing, about the way his hands shook after combat. The censors would cut it out anyway. So he wrote about the weather, about the French countryside, about Brennan and Dalton, and how they were good men. He didn't write about the nightmares that had started, the dreams where he was the one in the bomber, watching tracers float toward him, knowing death was coming and being unable to do anything about it. Early August brought a change in German tactics. They started sending their bombers in higher 30,000 feet, trying to get above the P-61's effective radar range. Didn't work. The Black Widow could climb to 30,000 feet, and the SCR-720 radar could track targets at that altitude if the operator knew his equipment. Brennan knew his equipment better than the engineers who'd built it. Then they tried low-level runs, bombers skimming the waves approaching the invasion beaches from the sea at 50 feet. The radar found them anyway. Brennan learned to filter out the sea, return the false echoes bouncing off the water. He could pick out a bomber at 2 miles, even when it was barely above the wave tops. The Germans tried electronic countermeasures. Chaff-thin strips of aluminum dropped from aircraft to create false returns on radar, primitive jamming equipment that flooded the radar frequencies with noise. Brennan adapted learning to see through the deception, finding the real targets among the clutter. Nothing worked. By mid-August, Luftwaffe bomber crews were refusing missions over Normandy. The word had spread. Das schwarze Gespenst, the black ghost. If you saw nothing but your wingman exploded, it was the P-61. If your radar warning receiver screamed but you couldn't see the attacker, it was the P-61. If you jettisoned your bombs and ran for home at maximum speed and barely made it back to Belgium, it was the P-61. The night sky over France belonged to the Americans now, but the Luftwaffe wasn't finished. They had one more card to play. They sent their aces. The intelligence brief came on September 1st, 1944. Major Wilhelm Krüger, Nachtjagdgeschwader 3, Night Fighter Wing 3, 43 confirmed kills over 4 years of combat. Britain, Russia, the Mediterranean, one of the Luftwaffe's best night fighter pilots. An expert in the Messerschmitt Bf-110G, the twin-engine heavy fighter that had dominated night combat since 1940. Krüger had been pulled from defending Germany against British bombers and sent to France specifically to deal with the P-61 threat. He'd studied the intelligence reports. American night fighter, twin engines, heavy, equipped with radar, 4 cannons. His assessment overrated. The Americans had built a bomber killer, not a fighter. Heavy aircraft were predictable, slow to respond, easy to outmaneuver. Krüger's Bf-110G weighed 15,300 pounds, almost half the P-61's weight. It had 2 Daimler-Benz DB605B engines, producing 2,950 horsepower total. Fast, nimble, deadly. Krüger was confident he'd shoot down the first P-61 he encountered. He was certain the American pilots were inexperienced, probably afraid. Definitely unprepared for a real dogfight against a veteran night fighter pilot. He'd fought British Mosquitoes. He'd fought Soviet P-3s. He'd fought modified American bombers trying to intercept German night raiders. All of them had died. The P-61 would be no different. On September 2nd, Kruger moved his Bf-110G to an airfield near Brussels, Belgium. He briefed his radar operator, Feldwebel Hans Dietrich, who'd been with him for 2 years. They'd developed an almost telepathic understanding. Dietrich would find the targets. Kruger would kill them. "The American plane is large," Kruger told Dietrich. "Heavy. It will turn like a freight train. We approach fast. We kill it before the pilot knows we're there. Simple." Dietrich nodded. He'd seen Kruger kill 43 Allied aircraft. The American wouldn't be a challenge. September 3rd, 1944, 2100 hours. Kruger took off from Brussels, heading southwest toward the Allied lines. His Bf-110G carried two 30mm Mk108 cannons, firing 60 rounds per minute, and two 20mm Mg151 cannons, firing 750 rounds per minute. The 30mm shells could blow a fighter's wing off with one hit. The 20mm provided volume of fire. Combined with the FUG-220 Liechtenstein radar that could detect targets at 2 miles, it was a proven killing combination. Kruger climbed to 15,000 feet and turned his aircraft toward France, searching for prey. At the same moment, 150 miles to the southwest, Nathaniel Bridger was climbing through 12,000 feet in P-61, a serial number, 42-5559. Routine patrol, circle over the front lines, wait for Brennan to pick up German bombers on radar, intercept and destroy. Same mission they'd flown 23 times before. Bridger was tired. They'd flown the previous night too, and the night before that. 3 missions in 3 days. His eyes felt gritty. His back ached from sitting in the cramped cockpit. He wanted coffee and sleep and maybe a shower, though the facilities at the forward airfield barely qualified as functional. Wyatt Dalton was in the top turret fighting to stay awake. He'd been writing a letter to Martha before the mission telling her about Emma's latest photograph. 6 months old now, starting to crawl. He'd never seen her move, never heard her cry or laugh, just photographs and descriptions in Martha's letters. He'd promised himself he'd survive this war. He had to meet his daughter. Elliot Brennan was at his radar station, eyes on the scope, watching for contacts. The green sweep circled endlessly. Empty sky. No targets. Another quiet night. Then, at 21:37 hours, both radar operators picked up contacts simultaneously. Brennan. Contact bearing 045, range 8 miles, Angels 15, Dietrich, contact. Peilung 210, Entfernung 13 Kilometer Höhe, 5000 Meter. 8 miles. 13 kilometers. Same distance, different measurements. 2 night fighters, purpose-built killing machines detecting each other at the same instant. Both turned toward the contact. Both accelerated. Kruger. American night fighter. Finally. Let's show them how real pilots fight. Bridger. German night fighter, probably Bf-110. Could be good. Stay sharp. Distance 7 miles. Closure rate 600 miles per hour. Both aircraft doing 300 closing head-on. 6 miles. Kruger pushed his throttles to maximum. The 2 DB605B engines howled, propellers biting the air, Bf-11 OG accelerating to 340 miles per hour. 5 miles. Bridger did the same. The twin R2800 engines roared 4,000 horsepower, driving the heavy Black Widow forward. 350 miles per hour, 360, 4 miles. Brennan's voice calm. Closure rate 600 knots. Time to contact 90 seconds. Dietrich's voice excited. Annäherungsrate 1000 Stundenkilometer Kontakt in 1,5 Minuten. 3 miles. Both pilots could see the faint glow of the other's exhaust now. 2 sets of twin engines burning blue-white in the darkness. Kruger expected the American to break off, to maneuver for position, to try to use his radar advantage. That's what the intelligence report said. American pilots were cautious, methodical. They didn't take risks. The American came straight at him. 2 miles. Bridger armed his 4 20mm cannons. 800 rounds ready. He'd fire everything if he had to. Kruger armed his weapons. 30mm cannons loaded with high-explosive shells. 20mm cannons loaded with a mix of armor-piercing and incendiary. 200 rounds total. Enough to shred the American aircraft. 1 mile. Closure rate, 880 feet per second. Visual contact. Both pilots could see the other aircraft now. Silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky. Twin-engine fighters closing at suicidal speed. Half mile. 3 seconds to contact. Both opened fire. The night exploded in tracers. German cannons, yellow-white flashes from the 30mm, red streaks from the 20mm. Shells the size of beer bottles and shells the size of a man's thumb, all traveling at 3,000 feet per second. American cannons, red-orange tracers from 4 20mm guns, 80 shells per second converging on the target point. A river of fire flowing through the darkness. The streams of tracers crossed each other like some deadly light show. Shell passing shell in the darkness, missing by inches, feet, yards. Kruger broke hard right at the last instant, pulling 6 Gs, the BF-110G groaning under the strain. He was certain he'd scored hits. He'd seen his tracers walk across the American's flight path. The P-61 had to be damaged. Dietrich was already working his radar, trying to reacquire the target for another pass. Then tracers flashed past their canopy from behind. Impossible. Kruger looked back and saw the P-61 on his tail 400 yards back, matched perfectly to his turn. How the American aircraft weighed 28,000 pounds. The BF-110G weighed 15,300. The lighter aircraft should turn inside the heavier one. Basic physics. Basic aerodynamics. But the Black Widow was glued to his 6 o'clock position. Kruger dove, pulling negative G, trying to use vertical separation. The P-61 followed. He pulled up hard, climbing, bleeding speed, trying to force an overshoot. The P-61 matched him, those huge wings and 4,000 horsepower keeping pace. He rolled left. The P-61 rolled with him, the spoiler on, snapping the heavy aircraft through the roll faster than should be possible. 3 minutes of desperate maneuvering. Kruger threw every trick he knew at the American. Split S, chandelle, barrel roll, high G turns that made his vision grey at the edges. Nothing worked. The P-61 stayed with him like it was welded to his tail. Kruger's confidence evaporated, replaced by something he hadn't felt in 4 years of combat. Fear. This pilot was good. Very good. And the aircraft was far more capable than the intelligence reports suggested. Dietrich's voice tight with stress. Herr Major, I cannot shake him. He's too close, too fast. Kruger. I know. Just hold on. But there was nowhere to go. Every time Kruger tried to disengage, the American was there. Every time he tried to reverse tracers, forced him to brake. The P-61 controlled the engagement completely. In the American cockpit, Bridger felt surprisingly calm. The P-61 was responding perfectly. Those massive wings that everyone mocked were giving him a turn radius that matched the German fighter. The powerful engines let him control energy, accelerating out of turns, climbing when needed. The radar kept the target illuminated even when he couldn't see it. This was what the Black Widow was designed for. Brennan's voice. Range 300 yards, locked solid. You have the shot. Bridger. Firing. 2-second burst. 80 rounds. Time seemed to slow. Bridger could see individual tracers arcing through space, red-orange streaks reaching out toward the German fighter. The shells traveled at 2,800 feet per second, but from his perspective they seemed lazy gentle. They weren't. The first rounds hit the BF-110G's left engine. The Daimler-Benz DB605 B engine, 1,475 horsepower, 12 cylinders of precision. German engineering simply ceased to exist. Pistons, crankshaft, camshaft, all transformed into shrapnel. Burning fuel sprayed backward, igniting hydraulic lines. The next rounds walked up the fuselage toward the tail. 20mm high-explosive shells detonating every few feet. The tail structure, already stressed from violent maneuvering, disintegrated. Vertical stabilizer gone. Rudder gone. Horizontal stabilizers shredded. The BF-110G went into an uncontrolled spin. Kruger made the decision instantly. Bail out. The aircraft was dead. No power on the left side, no tail control. Spinning at 4,000 feet and losing altitude fast. Rouse, rouse, rouse. He pulled the canopy jettison handle. The canopy blew away. Wind screamed through the cockpit. He unfastened his harness and rolled out into the darkness. Dietrich followed 3 seconds later. 2 parachutes blossomed in the night sky. The BF-110G continued its death spiral, impacting in a French field 30 seconds later. The explosion lit up the countryside for miles. Bridger circled once, watching the parachutes descend. He could have strafed them, could have killed both men while they hung defenseless in their harnesses. Some pilots did that, called it justice for the bombing raids for the civilians killed for the war the Germans had started. Bridger didn't. They were out of the fight. That was enough. He turned for home. Kruger and Dietrich landed in a field near the village of Rethel. Canadian troops found them before dawn, separated them, began interrogation. Kruger's first question to the interrogator wasn't about his fate or the war or anything tactical. The American night fighter. How does it maneuver like that? Something that heavy shouldn't be able to turn with a BF-110. The intelligence officer, a lieutenant from Toronto who'd read the technical reports, smiled slightly. Spoilerons. Combination of spoilers and ailerons. gives exceptional roll control. Plus, those wings generate massive lift, and 4,000 horsepower means it can maintain energy in the vertical plane. You weren't fighting a bomber, you were fighting a purpose-built night fighter designed by someone who understood the mission requirements. Kruger shook his head. We underestimated American engineering. That was a fatal mistake. For you, yes. For 42 other Luftwaffe aircrew who've encountered P-61s, yes. The question is whether the rest of your Air Force will learn before it's too late. They wouldn't. Bridger landed at 01:15 hours. Kowalczyk was waiting as always, cigarette glowing in the darkness. How'd she do? Perfectly. Dog fought a Bf-110. German ace, probably. Shot him down. Kowalczyk climbed up to inspect the aircraft. Found 3 small holes in the left boom where German cannon shells had passed through without hitting anything critical. Hydraulic line, fuel line, control cable, all missed by inches. You got lucky. Yeah. Wyatt Dalton climbed out of the turret grinning. That was incredible. Did you see the way we stayed with him? He couldn't shake us. Elliot Brennan was quieter, running calculations in his head. They'd fired 80 rounds. At 750 rounds per minute per gun, that was 2 seconds of firing time. 2 seconds to shoot down an aircraft flown by a veteran pilot with 43 kills. The efficiency was remarkable. The implication was that they were getting very good at killing. The official confirmation came through channels 3 hours later. German radar operator captured near Rethel identified the pilot as Major Wilhelm Kruger, NJG 343, confirmed victories. American P-61 victory confirmed. Bridger's 10th kill. He was an ace now. Double ace, actually. The squadron commander wanted to throw a party, wanted to bring in photographers, wanted to make Bridger the poster boy for the night fighter program. Bridger refused. I don't want a party. I just want to do my job and go home. You shot down one of their best pilots. That's worth celebrating. I killed a man who was probably very good at his job and had a family waiting for him in Germany. There's nothing to celebrate. The commander looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Get some rest, Lieutenant. You've earned it. But Bridger couldn't rest. He lay in his bunk, staring at the canvas tent ceiling, thinking about the dogfight. Kruger had been skilled, experienced. He'd done everything right. And it hadn't mattered. The P-61 was simply better. Better radar, better firepower, better performance than the intelligence report suggested. Superior technology defeating superior experience. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like murder with extra steps. September became October. The front lines moved east. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron moved with them, operating from captured German airfields, from grass strips bulldozed out of French farmland, from anywhere they could find 5,000 feet of reasonably flat ground. The missions continued. Bombers fell. German aircrew died. The kill count climbed. But something new appeared in October. V-1 flying bombs. The Germans had been using them against London since June, terror weapons designed to kill civilians. Now they redirected them toward military targets. Antwerp, the port city in Belgium that was supplying the entire Allied advance. Every night, V-1s launched from sites in Holland, flying at 400 miles per hour at 3,000 feet, carrying 1,870 pounds of Amatol explosive. Each one that got through killed dozens of people, destroyed supplies, slowed the advance. The P-61s were tasked with hunting them. It was different from hunting bombers. The V-1 had no crew to kill, no pilot to fear death. It was just a machine following a programmed course. Shoot it down and you saved lives without the guilt of killing. But it was also more dangerous. The V-1 carried 1,870 pounds of explosives. Get too close when it detonated and the blast would tear your aircraft apart. Bridger developed a technique through trial and error. Approach from directly behind at the same altitude. Match speed. Fire from 400 yards. Then brake hard up and away, climbing to get above and beyond the explosion radius. The first V-1 he shot down was on October 4th. Brennan picked it up on radar, distinctive return signature, small and fast. Bridger closed to 400 yards, seeing the characteristic shaped stubby wings pulse jet engine on the tail breathing fire. 1 second burst, 20 rounds. The V-1's fuel tank exploded, and Bridger pulled up hard 4 Gs, feeling the pressure suit squeeze his legs to keep blood in his brain. The explosion happened 400 feet below and behind. The P-61 shook from the blast wave but stayed intact. 1 V-1 destroyed. Lives saved in Antwerp. October 11th, 3 V-1s in one night. Bridger shot down all 3, perfecting his technique. 400 yards, 1 second burst break upward. Kowalczyk calculated that they'd saved perhaps 200 civilians with those 3 intercepts. The mathematics of life now instead of death. It should have felt better. It didn't. Because on October 17th, the mathematics stopped mattering. On October 17th, the war became personal in a way it hadn't been before. On October 17th, everything changed. The mission brief was routine. Stuttgart, German rail yards. Intel reported increased Luftwaffe activity bombers staging through the area. P-61S would patrol intercept anything that moved. Bridger, Brennan and Dalton took off at 2200 hours. Fuel load 165 gallons. Ammunition 800 rounds. Weather clear, visibility good, but heavy flak expected over the target area. Wyatt Dalton climbed into the top turret before takeoff. He'd received a letter from Martha that morning. Emma was 6 months old now, starting to babble, making sounds that might be words. Martha had written, "She's trying to say Dada. I tell her about you every day. She's going to know her father." Dalton had read that letter 5 times, memorizing every word. He'd written back immediately, telling Martha he'd be home soon, telling Emma he loved her, even though she couldn't read yet. He carried both letters in his breast pocket as they climbed to altitude. 22:37 hours, 15,000 feet over Stuttgart. The German anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. 88mm guns, 105mm heavy guns, shells with contact fuses and proximity fuses and time fuses. They filled the sky with explosive death black smoke puffs that appeared without warning, shrapnel traveling at thousands of feet per second. The German gunners were good. They'd had years of practice. They bracketed the P-61 immediately. Shells bursting at 15,000 feet, then 14,800, then 15,200, walking their fire, adjusting for wind and altitude, trying to find the range. Bridger jinked left then right, changing altitude constantly, making himself a difficult target. A shell exploded 100 feet below the aircraft. Close enough to hear the detonation over the engine noise. Close enough to feel the blast wave rock the airframe. Shrapnel whistled past. Most of it missed. One piece didn't. A fragment from an 88mm shell. 3 inches long, half an inch wide, jagged steel that had been part of the shell casing before the explosion. It traveled upward at 2,000 feet per second, tumbling, losing velocity as it climbed. By the time it reached the P-61, it was moving at perhaps 500 feet per second. Still fast enough. It punched through the thin aluminum floor of the top turret, penetrated Wyatt Dalton's left thigh, severed the femoral artery. Dalton felt the impact, felt sudden heat, looked down and saw blood impossibly dark in the dim turret lighting spreading across his flight suit. His voice on the intercom confused more than afraid. I'm hit bad." Bridger. "How bad can you apply pressure?" Dalton tried, put his hands over the wound. The blood came through his fingers hot and slick. Too much blood. The pressure was wrong. Every heartbeat pumped more blood out through the severed artery. His blood pressure 120/80. Normal. Then 100/70. 90/60, 70/40. The human body contains 5 liters of blood. Dalton was losing it at approximately 1 liter every 2 minutes. Brennan unbuckled and climbed back toward the turret, trying to reach Dalton in the cramped space. The turret was designed for one person. Getting a second person in there to apply proper first aid was nearly impossible. He tried anyway. Bridger turned for home. 12 minutes from Stuttgart to the nearest Allied airfield. He pushed the throttles forward, both R2800 engines at maximum power. 360 miles per hour, 380. The P-61 wasn't designed for that speed in level flight, but he didn't care. 12 minutes. 720 seconds. Brennan got into the turret, found the wound, tried to apply pressure, but the fragment had hit deep and the artery was severed inside the thigh. Surface pressure wasn't enough. Dalton needed a surgeon, needed a hospital, needed it 5 minutes ago. Blood pressure 50/30. Dalton's vision started to grey at the edges. His hands felt cold. His breathing became rapid and shallow. 10 minutes to the airfield. Dalton's voice on the intercom, weak now, hard to hear. "Tell Martha. Tell Emma about me. Tell her Daddy loved her." Bridger. "You'll tell her yourself, Wyatt. You're going to be fine. Just hold on." But they both knew it was a lie. 8 minutes to the airfield. Blood pressure 30/20. Dalton's consciousness started to fade. The cold spread from his hands to his arms, his chest. His heart was racing, trying to maintain pressure, trying to circulate blood that was no longer there. 6 minutes. Brennan held Dalton's hand, talked to him, told him about Chicago, about the girl who'd stopped writing about anything to keep him conscious. Dalton whispered something. Brennan leaned closer. "Emma, tell her I wanted to meet her. Tell her I'm sorry." 4 minutes. Blood pressure 20/10. The human brain needs oxygen. Oxygen requires blood circulation. Without sufficient pressure, circulation stops. Brain cells begin dying. 2 minutes. Dalton stopped responding. His eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing was shallow, irregular. His heart was still beating, but barely. Bridger saw the airfield lights ahead, pushed the nose down, diving trading altitude for speed. The airspeed indicator climbed past 400 miles per hour. The airframe shook. He didn't care. 1 minute. Blood pressure unmeasurable. Dalton's heart gave 3 more beats, then stopped. His brain, starved of oxygen for too long, shut down. His breathing ceased. 23:06 hours. Wyatt Dalton died. Age 22 years, 7 months, 11 days. Bridger landed 30 seconds later. Medics were waiting. They climbed into the turret, checked for pulse, tried to resuscitate. Worked for 10 minutes before admitting what everyone already knew. Dalton was gone. Bridger climbed out of the cockpit, walked to the side of the aircraft, looked at the blood pooling in the turret, dripping down through the aluminum floor, falling to the ground in dark drops. 3 inches of steel. 3 inches of random chance. 3 inches between life and death. He sat down on the ground and put his head in his hands. Brennan sat next to him, said nothing. There was nothing to say. Kowalczyk approached an hour later after the medics had removed Dalton's body. The mechanic looked at the hole in the turret floor. 3 inches wide. Could have hit anywhere. Could have hit a structural member and bounced off harmlessly. Could have hit the ammunition bay and exploded the entire aircraft. Instead, it hit Wyatt Dalton from Alabama, father of Emma, husband of Martha, 22 years old, who'd survived 29 combat missions only to die from a random piece of shrapnel in the 30th. Kowalczyk said quietly, "I'll fix the turret. Get her ready for the next mission." "There's not going to be a next mission," Bridger said. "Sir, I'm done. I'm not flying anymore." Brennan grabbed Bridger's arm. "Nate, you don't mean that. A piece of metal 3 inches long just killed the best man I know. For what? We shot down some bombers. We saved some supplies. Was that worth Wyatt's life?" "You know it's not about worth. It's about the mission. About stopping the Germans." Bridger laughed bitterly. "The Germans. Right. Like the pilot I shot down last month. Kruger. 43 kills. Probably had a family. Probably had friends who miss him. I killed him. And for what? So another German could replace him. So the war could keep going. What's the point?" Brennan didn't have an answer. They sat in silence as dawn approached. At 0500 hours, an orderly arrived with a telegram to send to Martha Dalton in Mobile, Alabama. "We regret to inform you." Bridger couldn't look at it. And that same night, at a different airfield 200 miles away, Sergeant Silas Kowalczyk was defusing an unexploded V-1 flying bomb that had landed near the flight line without detonating. Standard procedure. The Germans sometimes booby-trapped them. Had to be careful. Disconnect the fuse. Disable the warhead. He was careful. But 1,870 pounds of Amatol explosive doesn't care about careful. At 0320 hours, the V-1 detonated. There wasn't enough left of Kowalczyk to bury. When Bridger got the news at 0600 hours, he didn't react, didn't cry, didn't scream, just nodded. 2 friends dead in one night. The mathematics had finally caught up with them. October 18th, 1944. 24 hours after Wyatt Dalton bled out in the top turret. 24 hours after Silas Kowalczyk was erased by 1,870 pounds of high explosive. They assigned a replacement gunner that morning. Bridger didn't ask his name, didn't want to know. The kid climbed into the turret that Kowalczyk had repaired the night before he died. The blood was gone. The 3-inch hole was patched. Fresh aluminum covered the spot where Wyatt's femoral artery had pumped his life away over 12 minutes. The aircraft had no memory, no grief, just metal and hydraulics waiting for the next mission. Bridger envied the machine. The mission briefing at 2200 hours was identical to every other briefing. German bombers staging through eastern France. Intercept and destroy. Protect Allied ground forces. Standard night fighter operations. Elliot Brennan sat beside Bridger in the briefing tent watching him. The farm boy from Ohio who'd volunteered for adventure had disappeared, replaced by something harder, something that functioned but didn't feel. "Nate, you sure you're ready?" Bridger's voice was flat. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. If your head isn't in this, we both die." "We're all going to die eventually. Wyatt proved that. The mathematics just determine when." Brennan wanted to argue. Wanted to say something about duty, about honoring the dead by continuing their mission. But the words tasted like ash before he could speak them. They flew that night. 2 Junkers Ju-88s over. Nancy illuminated perfectly on Brennan's radar scope. Bridger intercepted with mechanical precision. First bomber at 400 yards, 1 second burst, 20 rounds. The Ju-88's left wing folded upward and the aircraft tumbled into a forest. Second bomber 2 minutes later, same approach. Same burst. Same result. 80 rounds total. 2 aircraft destroyed. Perhaps 10 German aircrew dead. Bridger felt absolutely nothing. That frightened him more than combat ever had. The missions blurred together through late October and November. Every 2 or 3 days, the orders came. Every mission Bridger flew and killed with perfect technical efficiency. The scoreboard climbed. The intelligence officers praised his accuracy. The maintenance crews painted more crosses on the nose of aircraft 42-5559. 11 kills, 12, 13. German radio intercepts showed increasing panic among bomber crews. The Schwarzer Gespenst was destroying everything that flew. Some Luftwaffe pilots were sabotaging their own aircraft rather than face the night hunters. The Allies were winning the air war over Europe. Bridger didn't care. He flew because they ordered him to fly. He killed because targets appeared on Brennan's scope. He landed and filed reports and slept dreamlessly for 4 hours and repeated the cycle. The numbness was total, complete, merciful. Brennan watched his pilot deteriorate with growing alarm. The man who'd shown mercy to parachuting Germans, who'd felt guilt after the first kills, who'd broken down when Wyatt died, had vanished. Something else operated Bridger's body now, a machine that executed missions with ruthless efficiency but felt nothing about the work. November 15th, 18 missions since October 17th, 29 days of constant operations. The squadron doctor tried to ground him. "Lieutenant, you need rest, real rest, a week minimum. There's a war on. The Germans you're killing now are barely trained teenagers. The veterans are dead or captured. You're executing kids who can barely keep their aircraft straight and level. Then it should be easy." But it wasn't easy. November 23rd, a Ju-88 over the Rhine River. Bridger's first burst hit the cockpit, killed the pilot, but didn't destroy the aircraft. The bomber went into a flat spin, the co-pilot fighting desperately for control, losing altitude, 3,000 feet, 2,000, 1,000. Bridger had the shot, could have fired again, could have ensured the kill. He didn't. He watched the Ju-88 crash land in a frozen German field, the fuselage breaking apart but not exploding. Watched 3 crew members stumble out of the wreck in the moonlight. Teenagers, 17, maybe 18 years old, too young to shave. Too young for this. The old Bridger would have felt relief. The new Bridger felt vague disappointment that they might fly again. Brennan's voice crackled through the intercom. "You had the kill. Why didn't you take it? They're out of the war." "Are they? Or are you losing your edge?" Bridger didn't answer. Couldn't answer. They landed at 0200 hours. Bridger walked past the scoreboard without looking at the numbers. Brennan caught up with him outside their tent. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that you're trying to get yourself killed." Bridger stopped walking, turned slowly. "What are you talking about? You're taking unnecessary risks, flying too close to flak, chasing targets too low, pushing the aircraft beyond limits. It's like you're waiting for the right piece of shrapnel to find you, like you want to join Wyatt and Kowalczyk." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Brennan's voice rose. "Because from where I sit watching you fly every night, it looks like suicide by increments. You're just waiting for something to go wrong." "You don't know what you're—" Brennan grabbed Bridger's jacket, pulled him close. "Wyatt told me something 2 days before he died. Made me promise. He said if anything happened to him, I had to make sure you got home to Ohio. Said you were the best pilot he'd ever seen, and you deserved to survive this war. Wyatt's dead. Promises to dead men don't count." "They count to me." Brennan shoved him backward. "And they should count to you." "You think dying makes you a hero? You think Wyatt wanted you to throw your life away feeling sorry for yourself? He wanted you to live. He wanted you to go home and tell Emma about her father, about how brave he was, about how he talked about her constantly, even though he'd never met her." Something cracked in Bridger's chest, a fissure in the numbness. "I can't tell her that, Elliot. I can't tell her that her father bled out while I flew as fast as I could and it wasn't fast enough. I can't tell her that 3 inches of random steel took away her father and there was nothing anyone could do. I can't tell her the universe doesn't care about good men or fathers or people who deserve to live. It just kills whoever's standing in the wrong place at the wrong second. Then tell her he loved her." Brennan's voice broke. "Tell her he carried her picture everywhere. Tell her his last words were about her. Tell her something that makes his death mean something." "Nothing makes it mean something. Wyatt's dead. Kowalczyk's dead. Kruger's dead, 43 kills, and I shot him down like he was nothing. We're all going to die, and the only question is when. The mathematics don't work, Elliot. They never did." Brennan released Bridger's jacket. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You're right. We might die tomorrow. Next week. Next mission. But until then, we keep flying. Not because we want to. Because if we stop, if we quit, then Wyatt died for nothing. Kowalczyk died for nothing. All of it was for nothing." Bridger wanted to argue, wanted to say it was already for nothing, But somewhere deep underneath the numbness, a small voice whispered that Brennan might be right. He nodded once. They stood in silence as dawn approached, and they kept flying. December 16th, 1944. The Germans launched their last desperate offensive in the West. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge. 300,000 troops punching through the Ardennes forest, trying to split the Allied armies, trying to reach Antwerp, trying to change the course of a war they were losing. The weather turned apocalyptic. Snow and ice and fog, visibility near zero, temperatures well below freezing. The kind of conditions that killed aircraft as efficiently as enemy fire. But German bombers flew anyway, hitting Allied positions every night, and the P-61s hunted them anyway because someone had to. December 23rd, 0300 hours, the coldest night of the winter. Mission briefing was brief. Patrol the front lines. Stop anything German. Don't die. Bridger had flown 29 missions since Wyatt died. 66 days of hunting and killing. 66 days of functioning without feeling. The numbness had become comfortable, safe, a fortress against the grief and guilt. But fortresses have cracks. They took off into a snowstorm. Visibility 400 feet. Ice forming on everything. Temperature -20 Celsius. The P-61's de-icing boots cycled continuously, cracking ice away from the wings and tail, but new ice formed faster than the boots could clear it. At 12 miles, Brennan picked up a contact. Ju-88, 8,000 feet heading southwest toward Allied lines. Bridger turned to intercept. The aircraft responded sluggishly. Ice added weight. Destroyed aerodynamics. The R-2800 engines labored to maintain airspeed. 300 miles per hour. 290. 280. Range closing. 8 miles. 6. 4. The German pilot was good, experienced. He knew someone was hunting him. He jinked, changed altitude, tried to use the storm as cover. Brennan tracked him perfectly. Called ranges and bearings with mechanical precision. They'd done this so many times it had become reflex. 2 miles. Visual contact through breaks in the snow. The Ju-88 was a dark shape against white clouds. The German dove. Full power, nose down, running. Bridger followed without thinking. Altitude 7,000 feet. 6,000. 5,000. Airspeed increasing. 320 miles per hour. 340. 360. The P-61 shook. Ice broke away from the wings in chunks. The engines screamed. The Ju-88 leveled out at 500 feet, trying to break radar lock using ground clutter. Brennan filtered through the false returns. Target bearing 090, range 1 mile, altitude 400 feet. Bridger descended. 350 feet. 300. The bomber dropped lower. 250 feet. The pilot was desperate, using terrain trees, anything to shake pursuit. Bridger stayed with him. 200 feet above frozen German farmland, flying through a snowstorm at 320 miles per hour with visibility measured in dozens of yards. It was insane. He didn't care. Range closing. Half mile. Quarter mile. Brennan's voice suddenly changed. Urgent. Afraid. Terrain elevation increasing ahead. Pull up. Pull up. Bridger looked up from his instruments. Saw the radio tower. 1,000 feet of steel lattice stretching into the darkness. Red and white paint barely visible through the snow. Obstruction lights blinking. Dead ahead. 3 seconds away at 320 miles per hour. Time fractured into slow motion. Bridger saw the tower. Saw death approaching. Felt his hands on the control yoke. And part of him, the part that had died with Wyatt, the part that had broken when Kowalczyk vanished in an explosion, the part that couldn't forget pulling the trigger and watching men burn, part of him wanted to keep flying straight, wanted it to be over, wanted to stop carrying the weight. Brennan screamed, "Pull up! Nate! Pull up now!" Bridger's hands moved, not because he wanted to live, because Brennan's voice penetrated the numbness and reminded him that he wasn't alone in the aircraft, that his death would kill Elliot too, that Wyatt had made Brennan promise to get him home. He yanked the control yoke back, both hands, full strength. The P-61 responded instantly, nose coming up, climbing, the twin R-2800 engines howling at maximum power. The radio tower passed underneath. A ground observer later filed a report. Said he saw the Black Widow clear the tower with less than 50 feet of separation. Said he could count rivets on the belly. Said the Ju-88 hit the hillside 3 seconds later, exploding in a fireball visible for 20 miles. Bridger leveled out at 2,000 feet. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold the controls. His heart hammered against his ribs. Breath came in ragged gasps. Sweat froze on his face in the cold cockpit. He'd almost died. 50 feet from disintegrating against a radio tower at 320 miles per hour. And the realization that crashed through him was worse than the fear. He'd seen the tower. Some part of him had recognized the danger before Brennan's warning, and he'd almost made a choice, almost chosen death. Brennan's voice was shaking. Jesus Christ, Nate. We almost died. I know. You didn't see it. You were focused on the target. You weren't. I saw it, Elliot. Silence filled the intercom. Long, heavy, terrible. You saw it? Yeah. And you almost didn't pull up. Bridger couldn't answer. The truth was too awful to speak aloud. They flew back to base in silence, landed at 0400 hours, shut down the engines, sat in the darkness. Brennan spoke first. His voice was quiet, gentle, the way you'd talk to someone standing on a ledge. You wanted to hit that tower. No, I didn't care if I did. That's the same thing. Brennan unbuckled his harness, turned to face Bridger in the cramped cockpit. Wyatt didn't want you to die. He explicitly told me to make sure you got home. Those were his last words to me before that final mission. If something happens, make sure Nate survives this war. And you're disrespecting his dying wish by chasing death every time we fly. I'm not chasing. Yes, you are. Brennan's control broke. Tears streaked his face. You're flying reckless. Taking insane risks. And tonight you almost killed us both because you're so busy feeling guilty. You forgot that other people need you alive, that new kid in the turret whose name you won't learn. He almost died tonight because you don't care anymore. The fortress cracked. Bridger felt something he hadn't felt in 2 months. Pain. Real, raw, unbearable pain. I can't do this anymore, Elliot. I can't keep killing people. I can't watch more friends die. I can't pretend any of this matters when good men die and bad men survive, and it's all just random chance and mathematics. It matters because we're still breathing. Brennan grabbed Bridger's shoulders. It matters because Wyatt wanted us to be breathing. Every bomber we stop is American soldiers who don't die. The equation works, Nate. We're saving lives. By taking them. I've killed 17 people, 17 aircraft, maybe 100 men total, and for what the war keeps going. Germany keeps fighting. More kids get sent up in obsolete bombers. When does it end? When we win. And we're winning because pilots like you are stopping their bombers. That's what matters. Bridger's voice dropped to a whisper. I killed Kruger. 43 victories, veteran pilot, probably had a family. And I killed him because my aircraft was better. Not because I was braver or smarter, just because American industry built a superior machine. What does that make me? A soldier doing his job. It makes me a murderer with better tools. They sat in the cold aircraft as the eastern sky began to lighten. Brennan tried to find words that would heal the wound. Failed. Some damage went too deep for words to reach. But something changed in Bridger that night. Not healing, not acceptance, but a decision. He'd keep flying, not because he believed it mattered, not because the numbness had lifted, but because Wyatt had asked Brennan to keep him alive, and Brennan was asking him to honor that promise. He owed Wyatt that much, even if he couldn't forgive himself for surviving when Wyatt hadn't. January 1945 brought the final Allied push into Germany itself. The Luftwaffe was dying. Fuel shortages grounded most units. Experienced pilots were dead or captured or reassigned to defending the Reich. The replacements were children 16 and 17 years old with 40 hours of training flying obsolete aircraft held together with salvaged parts and desperation. Killing them felt like murder. Bridger did it anyway. January 12th. A Ju-88 that couldn't maintain altitude. The aircraft bobbed erratically, climbing and diving. Bridger closed to 300 yards and saw the pilot's face in the moonlight. A teenager. Terrified. Fighting controls he barely understood. One burst. 40 rounds. The bomber exploded. The boy never knew what killed him. 14 confirmed victories. February 9th. A lone Dornier DO-217 running for home. The pilot saw the P-61 and waggled his wings, the universal signal for surrender. Bridger held fire for 10 seconds, considered letting him go. But orders were orders. The mission was intercept and destroy. Surrender wasn't an option at 20,000 feet over enemy territory with nowhere to land. He fired. The Dornier fell burning into German forests. 17 confirmed victories. Each kill felt worse than the last. Not because of guilt anymore. Bridger was past guilt. But because the futility was becoming impossible to ignore. He destroyed aircraft. Germany built more. He killed pilots. Germany sent up younger ones. Nothing changed except the numbers on the scoreboard. The war would end when it ended. Not because of anything Nathaniel Bridger did, That truth was somehow more unbearable than the guilt had been. February 18th, 1945. 0200 hours. The mission that would end his war. Intelligence reported unknown aircraft operating near Frankfurt, possible night fighters, possibly bombers conducting special operations. Orders: investigate and engage if hostile. Standard patrol. Bridger and Brennan took off at 2100 hours. The routine had become automatic. Climb to altitude, circle, wait for contacts, kill whatever appeared. At 0215 hours, Brennan picked up a radar return. Single aircraft, bearing 270, range 8 miles, altitude 12,000 feet. Bridger turned toward the contact. IFF interrogation. Brennan transmitted the identification friend or foe signal. Allied aircraft were supposed to respond with proper codes. The return codes were wrong. German frequencies, German encryption. Send it again. Brennan sent the IFF pulse twice more. Each time, wrong codes came back. Contact ground control. Verify no friendly aircraft in this sector. Brennan made the radio call. Ground control confirmed no Allied aircraft scheduled in the area. Unknown aircraft was presumed hostile. Range 6 miles. Bridger accelerated, closing for visual identification. 4 miles. Still too dark to see clearly. Overcast blocked the moon. 2 miles. Bridger attempted radio contact on Allied frequencies. Called in English. Called in the clear. No response. The unknown aircraft continued straight and level. No defensive maneuvers. No attempt to evade. Either the pilot didn't know the P-61 was there, or believed he was safe. 1 mile. Bridger could make out a silhouette. 4 engines. Twin-tail configuration. Large fuselage. Everything about the profile matched German heavy bombers. Focke-Wulf FW200 Condor. Heinkel HE-177. Both used 4 engines. Both had twin tails. Wrong IFF codes. Flying from German-held territory. No response to Allied radio calls. Matching profile of known German aircraft. Every indicator pointed to hostile. Range 800 yards. Bridger armed his 4 20mm cannons. 600 yards. The target maintained course. No evasive action. 400 yards. Bridger centered the illuminated reticle on the target's center mass. 300 yards. Still no response. No defensive fire. No recognition signals. Bridger took a breath. Made the decision. This was his job. Intercept and destroy hostile aircraft. Protect Allied forces. He pressed the trigger. 2-second burst. 80 rounds of 20mm ammunition. High explosive, armor-piercing, incendiary. All converging on the target at 2,800 feet per second. The aircraft exploded. Massive fireball. Wings separated from fuselage. Tail section tumbling away. Debris scattering across 3 miles of sky. Bridger flew through the debris field. Metal fragments pinged off the P-61's canopy and wings. In the flash of the explosion, illuminated for perhaps half a second, Bridger saw clearly. Not a Focke-Wulf, not a Heinkel. 4 engines, twin tail, American star insignia on the wings, Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. The world stopped. Bridger's hands froze on the controls. His mind refused to process what he'd seen, refused to accept it. B-17, American bomber, 4 engines, twin tail, just like the silhouette, just like Brennan's voice cut through the silence, confused, horrified. Was that... Did you see... That was a B-17. Bridger's voice came out as a whisper. Yes. We just shot down one of ours. Jesus Christ. We just killed... I know. Bridger's hands began to shake. Radio base. Tell them we engaged an unknown aircraft with wrong IFF codes. Tell them it was a B-17. Tell them we need immediate clarification. Brennan made the call. His voice cracked halfway through. They flew in automated circles while waiting for response. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Bridger's mind was blank. White noise. Refusing to think about what he'd done. Finally, the radio crackled. Intelligence officer's voice, carefully neutral, professional. Aircraft was a captured B-17 being operated by OSS for covert insertion mission behind German lines. Crew of 10 American volunteers. IFF codes were deliberately scrambled to avoid interception during penetration of German airspace. Flight originated from German-controlled territory. This is standard protocol for black operations. Pause. Lieutenant Bridger, your intercept followed all proper procedures. Wrong IFF codes. German flight origin. No response to radio contact. Visual identification of 4-engine twin-tail aircraft in darkness is unreliable. You acted correctly based on available information. This incident will be classified as friendly fire due to operational security failure. You are not at fault. But Bridger knew better. 10 Americans. Dead. Not by German fire. Not by accident. Not by mechanical failure. by Nathaniel Bridges' decision to press the trigger. They landed at 0250 hours. Bridger shut down the engines and sat motionless in the cockpit. 15 minutes passed. 20. He couldn't make himself move. When he finally climbed out, the squadron commander was waiting. "Lieutenant Bridger, I've reviewed the incident report. Intelligence is correct. You followed procedure. Everything indicated hostile." The OSS shouldn't have scrambled IFF codes without informing Night Fighter Command. This was their failure, not yours. Bridger looked at him, really looked at him, saw the commander's mouth moving, heard words about procedure and protocols and operational security. None of it mattered. "I made the decision, sir. I pressed the firing button. 10 Americans are dead because of my actions. That's my responsibility. You made the correct decision based on available intelligence." Wrong codes. German origin. No radio response. What else could you have done? Not fired, waited, verified, forced them to land. Something. Anything except killing 10 men on my own side. In combat, hesitation kills lieutenant. You did your job. Bridger shook his head slowly. My job was to protect Americans. I killed 10 of them. I can't fly anymore, sir. I'm done. You're exhausted. You've been in continuous combat since June. 56 missions. Take a week off. Rest. We'll discuss. There's nothing to discuss. Bridger's voice was flat, final. I'm not getting in that aircraft again. I'm not killing anyone else. German, American, anyone. I'm done. The commander studied him for a long moment, saw something in Bridger's eyes that made him nod. Understood. Report to medical for evaluation. You're officially grounded pending psychological review. Bridger walked away from P-61, a serial number 42-5559, for the last time. He didn't look back. Couldn't. Behind him, 17 German crosses painted on the nose, evidence of a successful combat record, proof of technical skill and tactical proficiency, and one unpainted cross, the one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Lieutenant Garrett Thorne took over Bridger's aircraft 4 days later. 27 years old, Iowa farmer, steady hands, competent pilot with 19 missions completed, not exceptional, not gifted, just solid. Thorne climbed into the cockpit that Bridger had occupied for 9 months and felt the weight of what he was inheriting. The seat was warm from the sun. The controls were worn smooth from Bridger's hands. The gun sight still held Bridger's eye relief settings. 17 victories painted on the nose, plus one that would never be painted. One that Thorne knew about from the classified briefing. One that explained why Bridger had walked away. Thorne flew 23 more missions between February and May, shot down 11 German aircraft, added them to his personal total, became the squadron's highest-scoring active pilot. But he took no pride in it. The Germans he killed were children, barely trained. Flying aircraft that should have been in museums. The war was over in everything but official proclamation. Germany was collapsing. The Luftwaffe existed only on paper. Each kill felt hollow. Necessary, perhaps, but hollow. On May 8, 1945, at 11:41 hours, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe ended. The shooting stopped. The dying stopped. The survivors looked at each other and wondered what came next. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron compiled final statistics: 127 German aircraft destroyed, 18 Phi-1 flying bombs destroyed, 31 P-61 Black Widows lost to all causes, 93 American aircrew killed, kill ratio 2.7 enemy aircraft destroyed for every friendly loss, the best ratio of any American night fighter unit in the European theatre. But statistics couldn't measure what the survivors carried home, couldn't quantify the nightmares, couldn't calculate the cost of pulling triggers in darkness and watching men burn. Nathaniel Bridger sat in a medical tent on May 8th when they told him Germany had surrendered. He felt nothing. The war had ended for him 3 months earlier over Frankfurt, ended when he'd killed 10 men on his own side, ended when he'd realized that all the training and procedures and protocols couldn't prevent him from becoming exactly what he'd feared, a killer. The medical officer diagnosed combat fatigue, recommended rest and reassignment to non-combat duties, said Bridger would recover with time. Bridger didn't believe him. Some things you don't recover from. You just learn to live with them. Or you don't. They shipped Bridger home in June 1945. Ohio looked exactly the same. The farm where he'd grown up. Fields of corn and wheat. The small town where everyone knew everyone, all frozen in time, unchanged by the war that had consumed Europe. But Bridger had changed so fundamentally he barely recognized himself. His mother cried when she saw him. His father shook his hand and said he was proud. His younger sister asked if he'd killed any Germans. He walked away without answering. The farm was unbearable. After 9 months of twinner 2800 engines roaring through his days and nights, the silence felt oppressive, threatening. He heard engines in the quiet, heard explosions, heard voices on the intercom. Tell Martha, tell Emma about me. Pull up, wrong IFF codes confirmed. 10 Americans killed. He lasted 6 weeks. In August 1946, Bridger moved to Cleveland. Got a job at the Glenn Martin aircraft plant building civilian planes. Small aircraft for businessmen and hobbyists. Clean work, honest work. Nobody died when he did his job correctly. He married Helen in 1948. Met her at a church social. She was kind and patient and didn't ask about the war. They had 3 children. Jack Jr. in 1949, Sarah in 1952, Michael in 1955. Bridger tried to be a good father, tried to be present for his children in ways Wyatt Dalton never got the chance to be present for Emma, tried to give them the childhood he'd lost somewhere over France. But part of him remained in that cockpit over Frankfurt, watching a B-17 explode, knowing he'd killed 10 men who trusted him to protect them. He never spoke about the war, not to Helen, not to his children, not to anyone. In 1967, Helen found his medals while cleaning the attic. Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 12 oak leaf clusters, European African Middle Eastern Campaign ribbon with 5 battle stars. All carefully wrapped in newspaper and hidden in a shoebox behind the Christmas decorations. She brought them downstairs, asked about them. These were from the war. Yes. Were you decorated? Were you a hero? Bridger looked at the medals for a long moment. I was a pilot who killed people. These are what they give you when you're good at it. But you fought for your country. You protected people. I killed 17 Germans and 10 Americans. The medals don't distinguish between them. Helen never asked again. The nightmares continued, 3 or 4 times each week, flying through explosions, seeing B-17 markings flash in firelight, watching Wyatt bleed out, hearing Kowalczyk scream as the V-1 detonated. Bridger woke screaming. Helen held him at first, eventually stopped asking what the dreams were about, eventually moved to a separate bedroom so his nightmares wouldn't wake the children. Some distances can't be bridged with love. In 1975, an invitation arrived. P-61 reunion, 30th anniversary of VE Day. Survivors gathering in Washington to remember the fallen and celebrate the victory. Bridger burned it without reading past the first paragraph. He didn't want to remember, didn't want to celebrate, didn't want to hear other pilots talk about their kills like they were proud accomplishments instead of ghosts that never stopped screaming. But his son, Jack Jr., found the ashes. Dad, you should go. You should see your old friends. They're not friends. They're men I served with. There's a difference. The invitation mentioned a special guest, a German pilot you fought, Wilhelm Kruger. Bridger's chest tightened. The ace. 43 victories. The man Bridger had shot down over the Rhine in September 1944. The man who was supposed to be dead. I'll go, Bridger said quietly. The reunion was held at a hotel near the Pentagon. 24 P-61 veterans, most in their 50s now. Some looked elderly, some appeared unchanged. All carried the same weight behind their eyes. Wilhelm Kruger was 61, grey hair, slight build, civilian clothes that hung loose on his frame. He'd spent 2 years in a Canadian POW camp, then returned to a divided Germany where his skills as a fighter pilot had no value. He'd eventually become a commercial pilot for Lufthansa. Spent 30 years flying cargo and passengers instead of hunting Allied bombers. When Kruger and Bridger met, they shook hands like old colleagues. You were the pilot, Kruger said. His English was excellent. September 3rd, 1944, over the Rhine. Yeah. I have wanted to meet you for 30 years, to ask one question. What's that? How did your aircraft maneuver like that? It weighed twice what my Bf-110 did. It should have turned like a freight train. But you matched every evasion I attempted. I could not shake you. How? Bridger explained. Spoilerons giving exceptional roll control. Massive wing area generating tremendous lift. 4,000 horsepower maintaining energy in vertical maneuvers. American engineering solving problems through brute force and innovation. Kruger listened carefully. Nodded. We underestimated American industry. That was our fundamental error. We thought individual skill and experience would overcome technological advantage. We were wrong. They talked for nearly 2 hours. About aircraft performance, about tactics, about the missions they'd flown and the men they'd killed and the war neither of them had wanted. They didn't discuss friends who'd died. That wound was still too fresh 3 decades later. As the reunion was ending, Kruger asked, "Do you still fly?" "No, haven't been in an aircraft since February 1945. "Why not?" Bridger met his eyes. Two men who'd tried to kill each other. Two survivors who'd outlived better men through luck and chance. "Because every time I think about flying, I remember bombers exploding. I remember a B-17 I shot down by mistake. 10 Americans dead because I followed procedure. I can't get back in a cockpit carrying that weight." Kruger nodded slowly, understanding without judgment. "I flew commercially for 30 years after the war. Every takeoff, I wondered if this would be the flight where the universe balanced the accounts, where I paid for the 43 men I killed. It never happened. I retired last year. I still wonder. Does it get easier? The guilt. No, you simply learn to function despite it, or you don't, and it destroys you slowly." Kruger paused. "We were soldiers. We followed orders. We did terrible things because our countries demanded it. Does that absolve us? I don't know. I will die not knowing." They shook hands again before parting. Two old warriors who understood each other better than anyone who hadn't killed could understand. Bridger's health declined through the 1980s. The nightmares worsened. He started drinking to sleep. Whiskey, bourbon, whatever dulled the memories enough to close his eyes without seeing explosions. Helen noticed the bottles hidden in the garage, confronted him, begged him to get help. He pushed her away. In 1987, the Veterans Administration finally gave his condition a name: post-traumatic stress disorder. They said he should have been treated decades earlier. Offered therapy, medication, support groups. It helped marginally. The nightmares decreased from 7 nights per week to 4. He reduced his drinking, started sleeping in the same room as Helen again. But the guilt never diminished, never faded, never released its grip. 17 German aircraft destroyed, 10 Americans killed by mistake. Wyatt Dalton dead from random shrapnel, Silas Kowalczyk erased by an explosion. All of it connected to Nathaniel Bridger's hands on triggers and his decisions in darkness. On April 14, 1993. At 3 a.m, Nathaniel Bridger died in his sleep. Heart failure, 74 years old. His last dream was of flying through fire, watching a B-17 explode, knowing he was responsible. Helen found him at dawn, called their children, made the arrangements. The obituary in the Cleveland Plain Dealer was brief. Nathaniel Bridger, 74, WW2 veteran. Survived by wife, Helen and children, Jack, Sarah and Michael, 7 grandchildren. Services: Friday at Holy Cross Cemetery, in lieu of flowers, donations to Veterans Mental Health Fund. Nothing about 17 victories, nothing about the Distinguished Flying Cross, nothing about shooting down a German ace, nothing about the German families who lost fathers and sons to his cannons, nothing about Wyatt bleeding out, nothing about 10 Americans dying by his mistake, nothing about 48 years of nightmares and grief, just World War II veteran, as if that explained everything. After the funeral, Bridger's children cleaned out the house, in the attic beneath decades of accumulated boxes and forgotten belongings. Jack Jr. found his father's logbook, leather-bound, pages yellowed with age, entries in neat pencil handwriting. Date, mission time, target, result. Emotionless data concealing a lifetime of trauma. The entries stopped on May 8, 1945, but at the bottom of the final page, written in shakier handwriting years later, was a final note: war ended. "We survived. Wyatt didn't. Kowalczyk didn't. 10 Americans I killed didn't. Was it worth it? I destroyed 17 enemy aircraft, saved lives by stopping bombers. The mathematics say I did more good than harm, but mathematics don't account for faces in dreams, for the randomness of who lives and dies, for carrying the weight of decisions made in darkness. I don't know if it was worth it. I'll never know. All I know is I made choices and men died, and I have to live with that until I don't." Note. Jack Jr. read it and wept. His father had carried that burden for 48 years without speaking of it once. The logbook was donated to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. It sits in their archives now, unread, except by occasional researchers who don't understand what the neat columns really mean. The P-61 Black Widow that Bridger flew, serial number 42-5559, was scrapped in 1949. The aluminum was melted down and recycled, possibly became part of civilian aircraft, possibly became cookware or car parts. The metal retained no memory of the missions flown or the men who died. But 4 P-61s survived in museums. The one at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum sits in a dimly lit corner of the World War II Aviation Gallery. Most visitors walk past it toward the more famous aircraft, the Spitfire, the Mustang, the B-17 Flying Fortress. Occasionally someone stops, reads the placard P-61, a Black Widow, Northrop Aircraft Company, 1944, first American aircraft designed from inception as a night fighter, SCR-720 radar, 420mm cannons, crew of 3, 127 enemy aircraft destroyed European theatre. Many crew members did not return home. In 2019, Bridger's grandson stood before that aircraft, 24 years old. Never knew his grandfather, who died 4 years before he was born. His father had told him, "Your grandfather was a war hero, but the war destroyed something inside him. He came home, but he never really came home." The grandson touched the cold aluminum fuselage, tried to imagine a 26-year-old farm boy from Ohio sitting in that cockpit, hunting in darkness, killing men he couldn't see, watching friends die, living with decisions that had no good answers. He couldn't imagine it. Nobody who hasn't lived it can. The German pilots stopped laughing after those first bursts of 20mm cannon fire shredded their formations over Normandy. They learned to fear the American night fighter with its invisible radar and devastating firepower. They learned that technology and industrial might could overcome experience and skill. But the Americans who flew the Black Widow learned something far darker. They learned that victory and survival are not the same thing, that you can win every battle and still lose yourself. That killing, even when justified and necessary and sanctioned by nations, exacts a price that compounds across decades. Nathaniel Bridger destroyed 17 enemy aircraft and saved countless Allied lives by stopping German bombers from reaching their targets. By any objective measure, he was a hero. The medals proved it. The statistics confirmed it. He died believing he was a murderer. Maybe both things were true. Maybe that's the only honest way a warrior can die, knowing he did what was necessary, while never forgiving himself for doing it. The P-61 Black Widow was the most effective American night fighter of World War II. Superior radar, overwhelming firepower, better performance than anyone expected. But its true legacy isn't the 127 victories or the 2.7 kill ratio. It's the 93 American aircrew who died flying it, and the survivors like Nathaniel Bridger who spent the rest of their lives wishing they understood why they lived when better men didn't. If this story moved you, honor the memory of men like Nathaniel Bridger, Wyatt Dalton, and Silas Kowalczyk by sharing it. Share it so their sacrifices and their struggles are never forgotten. Remember, heroes aren't fearless. They're terrified, but they fly anyway. And sometimes the price of victory isn't death. It's living with what you had to do to survive.